Hi, I'm Conor Byrne, and this is That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, welcome to Season 3 of That's What I Call Marketing. We are kicking off Season 3 with another amazing guest. Today, I am joined by Dom Dwight of Betty's and Taylor's of Harrogate. You may know Betty's and Taylor's for their brand Yorkshire Tea, and during his 15-year career at Betty's and Taylor's, Dom has seen Yorkshire Tea reach the #1 spot for market share. The brand is now claiming over 40% market share, and their Everything's Done Proper platform has been a driving force in that success since 2017. The long-term campaign continues to resonate with the audience thanks to, in part, its use of celebrities like Sir Patrick Stewart and Sean Bean, but also the brilliant writing of the team at Lucky Generals. Today, we talk about Dom's path into marketing, great example of a non-linear path. We chat about building blocks to the campaign of Yorkshire Tea. And like all things famous, it didn't happen overnight. But we discover how certain things have accelerated the path to growth. We talk about the importance of tying the work to commerciality. We talk about effectiveness, creating a summer banger, and the world of Taylor's coffee. And we also touch on Dom's new role that he's taking in the business. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you are listening or watching so you never miss an episode of That's What I Call Marketing ever again. You can rate this and other episodes, of course, and follow us all over social by finding That's What I Call Marketing. And of course, if you need help growth through marketing, get in touch with us today and see how we can partner with you to help you build the right marketing strategy and execution plan for your business. With years of experience, agency and client side across lots of sectors, we can come in and offer services across a range of areas. Just visit that'swhatIcallmarketing.com. And if you would like to get involved with the show through sponsorship or partnerships, get in touch with us. Dom, thanks. Take two. I'm going to be very honest. This is take two. Dom, thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. And you're my very first guest on Season 3. So thanks a million. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's an honour to be here and privileged to be part of kicking off 2024 with you.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, anyone who may not know you, I'll let you just do the brief introduction to Dom Dwight.
Sure. Well, so I'm Dom Dwight. I was the marketing director at Taylor's of Harrogate. I'm moving into a new role, but staying with the company, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I've been marketing director for 7.5 years, been with the company for 15. Prior to that, I used to work in regional journalism as an editor and a food writer, and I kind of made my way into marketing through copywriting and then social media. And I suppose the biggest thing that people might know our company for and the work I've done is for Yorkshire Tea. So in the time that I've worked for the business, Yorkshire Tea has gone from being kind of distant 4th place standard black tea in the UK to the #1 by quite a long way. And I think our kind of marketing efforts have been pretty crucial to delivering that. So it's been a fun time to be part of it.
Look, it's an amazing brand, amazing story, and I can't wait to get into it. I'm always fascinated by people's paths into marketing. As you say, you were into journalism, but you did music in college, am I right?
No, I played in a band.
Oh, you played in a band?
Yeah. No, at university, I studied English and history of art. But in my sort of late teenage years before university, I got very into drums and I had a variety of bands going on with friends. And then when I went to uni, I was very on a mission to find like-minded musician type folk. And actually, if I'm honest, the being in a band element of university probably became more of a priority than the course I was studying. Yeah.
Any success? Were you in the charts?
No. No, we had like quite a lot of local success I went to university in Leeds, and we basically played, the band was called Brass Moustache, which works in both a northern and a southern accent. And we played kind of every venue going, did quite well, but never got as far as a recording contract, which was obviously what we were really shooting for. Yeah. And my bandmates basically concluded that we needed to move to London if we were ever going to sort of get anywhere. And at that point, I was starting to fall out of love with doing being in a band for a job because it made it less fun. And I'd also, I was starting to get quite serious about a girl that I was seeing, and it kind of felt like I was being forced to make a big choice. And I'm quite pleased with the choice I made because I'm now married to said girl, and that worked out very well. But yeah, just long story short, the band then moved to London, and they got signed within about 6 months.
Stop. Did they?
Yeah, they did. And I think they had maybe 3 or 4 really fun years of touring and, getting treated like royalty, depending on which country they went to. And, there's no bitterness. Like they're really good friends of mine, and I was really happy for them. I've gone on to do stuff I've been very happy about. So it worked out well.
Yeah. That's amazing though. Like, what a story. And you went into journalism, probably natural from English, but then that's how you got into obviously writing, but copywriting then kind of became a thing. How did that all kind of transpire? Because not necessarily a linear path.
No, not at all. And there's not a lot about my path that is linear, actually. Like I've been very, I think, opportunistic. What happened with me with journalism was I didn't set out to get into journalism, but I basically, when I started doing it, discovered how much I loved it. And I think I had a kind of natural tendency to prioritize what would the audience make of how I'm saying this and what I'm saying. Is there a way to make it interesting? Which I think is an instinct that has served me well in whatever job I've had. But the thing about regional journalism is just that in the time that I was working there, this is like the noughties, the mid noughties, and the rise of internet advertising was basically killing most regional journalism. It was taking all of the ad revenue out of it. So I just felt like I was working in a very precarious industry that already was quite badly paid in the first place. Right. So I kind of started diversifying like lots of journalists do. I was freelance sort of writing for other publications, doing restaurant reviews like for the Yorkshire Post and things like that. But copywriting came about through some restaurant owners who I had written about, who then said they liked my writing and actually was I available to like help write copy for their website and things like that. And so again, I didn't set out to do it, but what I found was it was quite an easy transition to make. And there was something about web copy that I quite liked, the requirement to be really pithy. You've got to get to the point, but you also really want to engage people, all that stuff. And I gradually realized copywriting was more of a money spinner than journalism. And the part of me that was maybe ethically conflicted, that thought that journalism was where all the integrity lay, I think I gradually realized that's not true. Like when you're a journalist, you're still flogging a product. It's just a product is a magazine or a paper. You still represent a brand. And actually, if you're careful about who you do the copywriting for, you don't feel like you have to compromise on your own integrity if you feel like you're promoting something that is something you could be proud of.
Yeah. That and was advertising? Were you interested in advertising then? Because it's kind of like the connecting dots, right? Because you were kind of one thing lead to another. But was there kind of a,
what this is I think it's like several different strands of things I've been interested in or good at over my life. So I was very interested in advertising when I was a young teenager, and then to the extent that I actually did my work experience at GCSE age was with Saatchi & Saatchi, because I grew up just in southeast London, so it was possible for me to do things like that, which was great. But I think in my late teenage years, I became very sort of, I guess, shaped by the music and the culture that I was interested in, which was all very, very anti-commercial and anti-corporate. Right. You can't be listening to Rage Against the Machine and then planning to be the machine, can you? So I think I turned away from that stuff, but actually when I was in journalism, then copywriting, and then gradually realized that there were forms of copywriting and forms of marketing and forms of advertising that you could be really proud of because you're telling people about a good thing. Yeah. Then I think I got my head around, actually, there are ways to do this where you're not compromising.
At that, because I actually worked in nonprofits for a long time, probably similar kind of thing. I was like, kind of do well in the world and that kind of thing. But actually, what I realized when I worked in fundraising and nonprofits, how competitive and commercial it was.
I definitely had that naivety thing that I think loads of people have, which is you sort of think that certain industries are somehow purer
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
less competitive or whatever. And I just think that they're not. And that actually you can find problems and sort of integrity challenges wherever you go. So you've just got to be careful and choosy about who you work for, who you work with, who you represent, haven't you?
Yeah, 100%. And then that obviously then led you to Betty and Taylor's. How did that come about? It was a copywriting role, was it, that they looked for
Yeah,
you to join?
they had a. I mean, the funny thing is, that's not the role I actually applied for. I when I was trying to diversify away from my journalism job, I had become quite good friends with the press officer at Betty's,
Okay.
just because she was a lovely lady who sent the most impeccably written press releases, always with a beautiful high res photo, and often with a free cake. Which, like, if you know regional journalists, like, that it's not complicated getting coverage. Like, just send them free things and send them a decent usable picture and, good words. So I always had her pegged as like a good person. And I remember chatting to her about feeling like I needed a change. I'd learned enough about Betty's and Taylor's to learn that it was this quirky family owned business. And I loved the family story. The more I learned about their values, the more I just thought, these sound like a good set of people. And they were advertising a role which was actually a campaign manager for their tree planting environmental campaign, which at the time was called Trees for Life. I mean, Betty's and Taylor's have basically been planting trees in one way or another since 1990 something. I think they've planted about 8 million trees so far. Big part of our kind of our carbon neutral journey has been that as well. Anyway, I applied for the role. Absolute, moonshot, because I had zero qualifications for it. And I really need to thank the HR director, who at the time was a lady called Alison Straw. She, because she didn't just chuck my CV in the bin, she contacted me and said, "Seen your CV. I don't think you're right for this role, but there's another role that we're thinking about recruiting for, which I think you might be well advised to apply for." And it was this in-house copywriter role. So, that led to a different conversation. And then luckily enough, they chose me for that.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? I love talking to people who have non-linear paths, as we've said with yours. And I think it's great that people hear both sides. So, like, the person who went to college and only ever wanted to do marketing and advertising. You mentioned, like, Yorkshire. Was Yorkshire Tea the main brand of Betty's at the time, or were there other brands that you were working on?
So, no, actually, the sort of family business consists of Betty's, which is quite separate to Taylor's. And Betty's is basically, it is 5 cafe tea rooms dotted around Yorkshire. Beautiful. If you've never been, they're like lovely place to go for afternoon tea, or all sorts of kind of baked, delicious things. I knew the Betty side of the business. When I joined the business, I only really vaguely understood that there was this Taylor's side to the business, which was the mass manufacture of tea and coffee and specialty tea. And as the copywriter for the first year or so, I didn't really get much chance to work on Yorkshire Tea, because anything to do with Yorkshire Tea was tended to be handled like by a big London agency, and it would be, it would be because really it was advertising or nothing. There were no other forms of comms. So it was the kind of advent of social media really that gave me an opening, because I think it was too small and too unknown and unpredictable for our agency at the time to be bringing it and saying, this is something we should be doing. So it was me as just a kind of like, one-man band in a upstairs office with no one really knowing what I was doing, developing Yorkshire Tea on Twitter. I think I was just given, it was a really lovely combination of just that moment where the technology was taking off, but nobody really understood it well enough. That meant that there was no one breathing down my neck. So I just had one or two really supportive people who thought that what I was finding out was quite interesting, which was, basically there were people online talking about tea, and as mundane as that sounds, back then that was like free insight. And the thing that was really good about it was the kind of comments, the way people were talking on social media about them. They were talking as if they were having a private conversation. So it just felt like the type of stuff they were saying was very unfiltered and very authentic. I always use the example, you just imagine like a graphic designer who's left home from Sheffield and got the job of a lifetime working for Apple or something. And he's realizing the stuff he's missing from home, and he befriends some web designer who's based somewhere else in California, and there's also from the north of England. And the two of them suddenly strike up a friendship, talk about how much they'd kill for a cup of Yorkshire tea right now. That was the kind of conversation that I was finding. And I was able to sort of bring those conversations to the kind of right people at Taylor's and say, look, this is interesting, isn't it? Do you think we should be on there so that we can listen and maybe answer questions and just participate in the conversation? And I do think that start in social media was quite key for Yorkshire Tea. Like, we didn't join late with a real clear idea of how we were going to exploit it and make the most out of it. We joined early in a small way. And our main thing was we wanted to listen and join in rather than broadcast.
Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? It's kind of almost not naivety, but like just a newness to it all and figuring it out. And you were there. What was the tone of voice that you adopted then at the time? Like, did you have the platform that you have now, which we'll get into, but was it a similar tone of voice?
The tone of voice was really just sort of me.
Yeah.
And then when it tipped to a point where I had lots of other things to do, I couldn't keep that up. I went looking for somebody who could become the kind of main social media person. Tried a few different people before I found this lovely chap, Tom Hay. Tom, a bit like me, was a former journalist, but he had been a news editor of the Harrogate Advertiser. So obviously, we're not talking the Sunday Times here, but there is something about news that just, I think it instills like a quickness of wit, of decision-making, of judgment, all those things. So Tom just slotted in really well, and Tom's much funnier than me. And he's taken more and more risks. I suppose it started with me giving him the cover to do that. But as he grew in confidence and as we grew in confidence, he was able to push it further and further. So if you look at the tone of voice of Yorkshire Tea today compared to 10 years ago, we're a lot more, we're just a lot more confident in our use of humor and in the way that we respond to people. But it's always, for me, a really important principle is always got to be cut through with humanity. Like, so we always try to be like authentic and compassionate and decent with people. I'd never want to be the kind of brand that like we put being funny first above being nice.
Yeah. Probably maybe Northern values a bit, right? Because that's to me comes across, and then the platform, I think, that you kind of leaned into around the idea of everything being done proper. I'd love to talk a bit about that. And
sure,
I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a sign in, is it the canteen or something, or somewhere in the building that says something along those lines? And that's
there is. It's a lovely story because it's a nice sort of evolution. But I'll try not to tell the very long version of this story, but I do have to go back to the campaign before the one that you mentioned. So in around 2011, we came up with a campaign where, to prove how much we cared about doing tea properly, we sent our converted ice cream van, Little Urn, which is basically an ice cream van that serves tea, done up to look like the Yorkshire Tea box. We sent him to America and drove him around finding Brits who were on holiday or expats who were suffering from terrible tea, and we rescued them. And it was a great gig for me because I got to go for a couple of weeks, and my job was to kind of like report on social media where we'd been and where we were going and stuff.
Wow.
But the reason why I mentioned the campaign is that I think that's the first point. Firstly, where we started using this word proper. And secondly, it was quite a bold campaign and it gave us confidence. And in the following few campaigns, we stuck with this idea of proper, but we kind of grew in bolshiness and quirkiness with successive campaigns. Then when we get to, I think it was 2016 and 2017, and that's when we shifted to working with Lucky Generals as our creative agency, and where everything's done proper was their strategy. And the key thing for them was that they noticed correctly that what we'd done is we'd built this proper thing into being quite powerful. but really to stand any chance of one day overtaking Tetley or PG Tips, who were the number 2 and number 1 by quite some way, we needed to find a way to get beyond the audience we were reaching and start to speak to some of their audience in a more powerful way. And this was true. Like, what was happening was, I think we'd done a really good job of making everyone that was already aware of Yorkshire Tea become super aware of Yorkshire Tea and to love us a bit more. But what we weren't doing was, we just hadn't found a way to crack through to the people where Yorkshire Tea just wasn't on their radar at all. Where Lucky's came in with some absolute genius was just in the use of celebrity, but in the clever use of celebrity, where you're not using a celebrity as a gimmick. So this idea was, if we went out trying to tell people that Yorkshire Tea is better because of some technical product related claim, it wouldn't cut through. People would just not switch on to it, because people are quite habitual about tea, and we talk about sleep shopping. They're not very conscious in their choices. Whereas actually, if what we did instead was humorously and dramatically bring to life that we care so much about doing everything properly that even the smallest, most mundane things are done to the nth degree of properness. And what better way to illustrate that than to have some of the world's most famous experts at that thing. So, we had the hold music was performed live by the Kaiser Chiefs. Our interviews were conducted by Sir Michael Parkinson. Our internal package couriers were the Brownlee brothers, the Olympic triathletes. We had Sean Bean doing his rousing kind of general type thing, but as our induction speech for new starters. And then most recently, we had Sir Patrick Stewart doing leaving speeches. And the campaign's just been so successful. The Patrick was the most recent one, but I guess what we've done is we actually launched that campaign with 3 executions. So we started with the Kaisers, with Parky, and with the Brownlees. And it was, thankfully, none of those folk was quite as famous as someone like Sean Bean or Patrick Stewart. So we could afford those 3 groups of people. Right. Also, it was a completely untested idea. So, they don't know what they're getting into. So the price was affordable, basically. And there's just something really helpful about having 3 executions of the same idea in circulation at the same time. Because what it meant was, if you saw one, you probably got the point. But if you saw all 3, you definitely got the point. But with enough variety that it didn't bore people. And that really helped us understand that we were onto something. So yeah, this where everything's done proper is really working for us. And the time of sort of recording, we're not hearing anything to suggest we should change yet. And then finally, just back to your original question. Sorry, I did say it was a long answer. Where part of this came from is, when we've been talking about proper, one of the previous ads had a line in it where it said, "We don't do things like that around here. We do things proper." And "we do things proper" as a quote had been printed in a big decal on one of the office walls. And when Lucky's came to see us, they saw that. And I think it just really imprinted it upon them that, like, this is for real. Like, it's not just a strapline. We mean it.
And isn't that lovely when you find something that's actually like really authentic, true to the brand, and people walk past it every day in the office or wherever, that they live it and believe it, and then it's kind of, you're not trying to make something up, I guess, but it has a real place.
I mean, I do understand that sometimes if you're starting something from scratch, you kind of have to start with an intention and then make it real. But what I've never really been into is I suppose this is maybe the anti-corporate part of me is still there. It fills me with existential dread, the idea of being in a business that's got values printed on the wall, but everybody knows that actually those values are nonsense, and they're not lived, and they're not real, and they're not sincere. So this whole thing about authenticity, I think it's incredibly important personally for me. I feel like, together with my team and a bunch of other important people, we've made it essential to Yorkshire Tea. And I'm therefore really happy with that formula, because it works for me as an employee, and it works for the brand, and it feels like it works for our consumers. So, it's a win-win.
Yeah. Did you, when you were, it's very interesting. I actually didn't know the 3 executions was almost an intentional thing, right? And kind of, were you not hedging bets, but were you kind of were you thinking, well, if two don't work, one might, or were you more kind of, it was a way to tell the story in a better way?
I think there probably was a little bit of hedging our bets going on, but it wasn't from a negative place of we had concerns about any one of them.
Right.
I think there was a little bit of being spoilt for choice and then realizing maybe we didn't need to. That we did. I guess what we particularly worried about was each of our first executions felt like they were strong, but would they really get noticed by the whole country? Because that was, you remember the point I made earlier about wanting to cut through to those diehard PG tips and Tetley drinkers. And the more that we tried to weigh up each execution as the sole execution, the more we thought, well, look, I think we wrongly or rightly, we presumed that Kaiser Chiefs would probably speak to a young audience, that Parky would speak to an older audience, and that the Brownlees would probably speak, we thought, to a more of a sporting audience, which therefore means it's probably a little bit more male. And we were just trying to make sure that we had covered as wide a sort of set of audiences as possible.
And in your discussions and your conversations with Luckies and also people in the business, did you talk about fame? Because fame, these obviously are fame ads.
I guess at some point early in the brief, we agreed that what we were trying to achieve with Yorkshire Tea was to make it culturally famous.
Okay.
And I think that was a Lucky's push, because what they saw was when you looked in the Yorkshire Tea community, like the online audience, and we got quite a absurd amount of loyalty and engagement, and in some cases evangelism for Yorkshire Tea. So when you look into that space, what you see is a brand that means a lot to a bunch of passionate people. And I think what they were thinking was, we need to find a way to tap into this magic and make some of that feeling spread around the nation. It was just their smart play was that actually, if you use this idea and you particularly lean on the use of celebrity, then that's the way. Because if the person watching the telly Yorkshire Tea doesn't really resonate with them yet, but they do know who Parky is, or they do know the Kaiser Chiefs, then that's the way that we get into their frame of reference. And that has worked.
And it's also like, I think to the stuff that Paul Feldwick writes about in his books, about fame, and, even going back to, I can never remember who wrote this quote, but the idea of, advertising in the 60s when TVs were just starting out, it was like, you're going to be in someone's living room, be, an enjoyable and guest that they want you to come back. Like, there's a lot of that about it, that was like, this is work that people would want to see over and over again.
Yes, I absolutely live by that. That idea that I just think it's so healthy for anyone involved in advertising to remember that it's an interruptive thing, and that the people you're interrupting did not ask you to do that. If you're lucky, they might accept that there's a sort of value exchange going on, which is like, I have to put up with this because that's what allows me to watch YouTube for free, or that's what makes ITV possible. All that stuff. And I've kind of said this so many times that I'm a bit sick of myself saying it, but I genuinely remember a period when I was growing up where that thing they say, where the ads were often better than the programs they interrupted. And I think that's one of the things that really connected me with Lucky Generals through the pitch, was I just felt like we'd met kindred spirits. And I feel like that's been really important to the Yorkshire Tea advertising, actually, is not just the strategy and the use of proper or the use of celebrities, but the actual craft of the scripts is that they're funny. They're basically 30 or 60-second comedy sketches.
Yeah.
And that really reminds me of the kind of classic British comedy that I grew up watching, whether it's like Monty Python or The Fast Show or whatever, just like really lovely, entertaining British wit that then also does a really good job of landing a product message.
Yeah. And it's hard to do, it really is not, it's not easy. Is that why do you think maybe people we don't do enough of it? Because it is really hard to get right, because there isn't enough of it. Maybe it's a very strongly held view I have, is a lot of our advertising isn't enjoyable enough. It doesn't all have to be funny, but at least make it enjoyable.
Yeah, I think my main way of trying to understand why so much advertising is really naff is a lot of it's global. And I think if you're a global brand and you've got an ad platform that needs to work in multiple countries and in different cultures and in different languages, I personally don't think that should stop you from making an entertaining ad, but I can understand why it's a lot less straightforward. So that's one thing. But I also think there's just a lot of conflicting thinking circling around, if you've got to get a message through and the person's not going to give you their full attention. So you want to hit them over the head with a sledgehammer with your message. And it's like, well, that's one way to go about it. But, what's the classic example would be Barry Scott and Sill It Bang, one of the most annoying adverts ever, but feels like it was very deliberately annoying. And the fact that I can still remember the character's name is testament to how effective it was. I just think if I could choose, I would rather be fondly remembered.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think maybe
Barry Scott.
And the other thing is, I guess we all kind of woke up to the fact that rational advertising is weak and emotional advertising is powerful. But what I feel like has happened in the last sort of 10 years is when we think about emotion, we've tended to go for the heartstrings, haven't we?
Yeah.
And, some really amazing ads that have done that, like very touching ads. Sometimes you watch an ad and you're like, I cannot believe I've got a lump in my throat about a national lottery advert or something like that. I can't believe John Lewis have made me cry. And I feel like those ads are, the best of those ads are incredible. But what it led to was like a bandwagon of loads of people trying to break your heart. And if it's done badly, it's just so annoying, isn't it? I just feel like not many people went for the other angle of actually will make people laugh.
Yeah. And 100%. And I think COVID was definitely, I remember that period of COVID advertising where everyone was there to help.
Yes.
Someone did a mashup, I think, of all those, and like
I've seen it.
Same piano track.
It's really like it's quite that mashup is quite a damning indictment of marketing and advertising,
isn't it?
Advertising, isn't it? Because it's just like one ad after another that just has the same sentiment, the same words, the same. It's all like, in these troubling times, we're here together. We know what you're going through. Da, da, da. Funnily enough, we actually had during COVID. I think this is possibly quite a useful example. We produced a film which we called The Social Distancing Teapot. And this film was released, it was an online film only. We released it just before people were going back after the first lockdown. And it was an idea that Lucky's had that we were playing around with for a while. But to be honest, I think my team felt a bit nervous because it was a humorous ad. And it's like, really? Is it okay to make fun and have a joke about COVID? Like, it's quite a serious subject. But our angle that we were coming from was recognizing that in Britain, it felt like there was a sort of shared cultural truth, which was we were all feeling quite nervous and awkward about going back to work. Yeah. Some of those nerves were about serious things, but most of the nerves were just about like, oh, it's going to be a bit weird, isn't it? Going back to work and trying to maintain 2 meters distance. And so long story short, the idea of the video was we created a teapot that had a 2 meter long spout. So that the teapot served as a way for you to do tea together, but keep a respectable distance. Probably should have sent one to Downing Street, shouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, it was so good though. It was what was needed. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, yes, we can have a laugh. One of the things I did want to ask you about, because you touched on it, when you joined, you were fourth in the market. You're now number one.
Number one, by quite some way now, yeah.
And somebody had sent me a note a while ago, last season, about this podcast and said, "Oh, it's just a hiding place for brand marketers." Kind of accusing me and us of not really being commercially minded and not thinking about that. Now, I strongly disagree with that person, but clearly the work has had an impact on the business. Can you talk to me a bit about that and how you've kind of seen the impact the campaign has had on the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing is that not to see them as separate things. The creativity and the kind of stuff that people might think of as fluffy and the commercial part is, because I think if you just focus on the commercial part, then that's a really difficult path to tread and build anything significant. And if you just focus on the fluff, you could end up not, you'll miss the kind of commercial realities of the market you're in. So what I think we had was I joined the business at a point when the brand had gone through a decade or so of rapid distribution expansion. So Yorkshire Tea was physically available in many, many more places, but it was relatively under communicated. So the mental availability side for Yorkshire Tea was really low. So that was another example of right place, right time. I think I worked with a group of people to gradually go, okay, so how do we tackle that mental availability thing? And, it took a leap of faith at first for the powers that be within the organization to sign off a higher level of media investment and to go for a slightly more creative ad approach. It's worth saying, we didn't get it right straight away. So prior to that campaign that we did in 2011, where we went to the US, we'd had a few goes, and some of the executions kind of worked on their own, but they didn't ladder up to anything big and lasting. And some of them didn't really work. So the US campaign and the use of Proper was our first campaign where the feedback we got was Proper isn't working. Because the ad was quite bold, it got the trade way more interested in Yorkshire Tea. Right. So we were finding that they were quite supportive, and when you're trying to get better display at a time when you're advertising, their belief in our ad helped us. That then meant that and this is probably one of the harder nosed bits that I'd really like to get across, is through this period we were quite fixed on measuring the effectiveness, econometrics style. Yeah. So because we could show a positive return, then even if you already believed that advertising was something you needed to do, actually the evidence was it's paying you to do this. So that was great. That was a really important element. And I guess where we were fortunate was, you take one step and then you show the evidence that step has been a worthwhile investment. Then you'd take second step, and we would build on what we'd learned from the last campaign, push the envelope slightly by being a bit louder and a bit braver, maybe up the investment. And then the next round of effectiveness said, you're still on the right track, keep going. When we got to where everything's done proper, I guess the use of celebrity was both a commercial sensitivity, because I basically needed more money. Yeah. And a cultural sensitivity, because there were some people that worked at Taylor's were a bit like, is that not a bit gimmicky and a bit naff? And I had to reassure them, not in the way we're going to do it. And thankfully, when we launched those 3 executions, even though it had been a higher level of investment that we were used to, the impact was immediate. So there was really encouraging signs in the early days. And the way we executed it, anyone that had fears that use of celebrity was going to feel a bit naff and gimmicky, they were reassured. So that then gave us the confidence to go on and work with people like Sean Bean, who, because of his higher level of fame, is a more expensive person to book. But the Sean Bean ad, the other campaign had been really successful, but the Sean Bean ad on its own was kind of more successful than everything else put together. I knew he was famous and I was excited about working with him, but I wasn't prepared for the level of fame that Sean actually has. Really? Because I was thinking people basically think of him as he's the guy out of Game of Thrones and maybe Lord of the Rings. But actually, there were people coming out of the woodwork. I had sort of people my mum's age who would be like, I remember him in Lady Chatterley's Lover or as Sharp and stuff. Right. God, you forget that he's been a jobbing actor for a long time. So he actually sits in people's consciousness. Anyway, so Sean Bean was probably the point that was the slam dunk, where it's the impact of that. When we launched Sean Bean, our market share, we basically overtook Tetley at that point and became the number 2. Oh, wow. So that helped as well, when you've got the evidence, but you've also got a key milestone that gets everybody excited. And then around about the time just before we launched Patrick Stewart's version, we also then overtook PG Tips. So when I first joined the business, I think Yorkshire Tea had about 11-12% share, was in 4th place. PG Tips and Tetley had about 34-33% share each. So huge, dominated the market massively. Now we've got 36.7% share, and PG and Tetley are down in the low 20s. In fact, in the last quarter, we've just passed the 40% mark for the first time. Wow. So it's mad. I've always believed in Yorkshire Tea, but I don't think any of us really ever thought it would go this far.
That big.
Uh,
Like, and was that like an articulated ambition that you had at the time to be number one?
for quite a long part, no. I think we basically we were a challenger brand in that we wanted to prove that the other guys were wrong, kind of thing, and that there was a better way. So
Yeah.
I felt like we had a big mission, which was we wanted, because the other thing that's worth adding is all of this time, like the standard black tea category, even though it's a massive category, all of this story, that category's been in decline and it's still
Yeah.
in decline now. So I think rather than focusing on trying to be the biggest, we were just trying to focus on being the best and to have a positive message that this product in this category was not yesterday's news. And it was something to be excited about and to remember how much Brits in particular love it.
Yeah.
I think it was really once we got to the where everything's done proper campaign and we had this ambition of becoming culturally famous, that was the first time that we started talking about shooting for number one day. But even then, I think we felt a bit uncomfortable making it all about being number one. Like we wanted, like I said, I think we've got a real thing in our business about it's better to be better, not bigger.
Right.
And if bigness comes as a result of being better, fine. But we're not out for bigness in the first place. I think that is where a lot of companies go wrong.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Like as a culture to work within, that it's about being the best. It's a very different articulation of maybe the same thing as you say. Ultimately, it might lead you to being number one, but being better is a really interesting way of talking about it. One of the things, obviously, that has happened has been like fresh consistency. As you've said, you've had different executions. Of effectively the same creative idea, but just done differently and brilliantly. And I do think clearly famous people, but the acting, I mean, the Sean Bean one is just unexpected when you know what I mean. And then the fire drill, such a brilliant line. Like it's so good.
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
But in 2023, 2023 was the year of music for Betty and Taylor's, both tea and coffee.
Yeah, true. And thank you. Yeah, because it's often the Yorkshire Tea story can kind of take over because that's the kind of like real incredible success story. But we have also got other brands. So there's Taylor's Coffee. But just quickly on the Yorkshire Tea point. So yeah, 2023, we've had an idea for a while. It was one of those insights that comes from those early days of Twitter that I first started talking about. So we know that there are a lot of people out there that are so picky about their tea that they will take tea on holiday with them. And it's like, I think this maybe exists in other cultures, but it's definitely true of Brits. And it's an idea we've kicked around for a while, but it was only this year that we kind of developed the confidence and set aside the capacity to do something about it. And because we wanted to make a piece of content that was all about taking tea on holiday, we've had some success with doing musical comedy videos online before. But this one was much sort of bigger and bolder. But we just thought if we're going to make a comedy song about tea and about taking tea on holiday in the summer holiday, it's got to be a banger, which kind of led us to the idea of what if we made it all about a young lad going to Ibiza? So it's a kind of, Ibiza summer dance track, which if anyone's not heard it, I imagine they're just cringing with awkwardness about how bad this could be. And we were worried about the same thing. But thankfully, like the talent that we used to develop the idea and make it, the Lucky Generals team, they just did such a good job. It's what I love about it is it still feels like it comes from the brand. It still feels true of the brand, but it also feels like it's quite an authentic representation of like a young person's sort of view, but also in terms of music as well. Yeah,
it's so good. I like, and sorry, the insight into, the packing. I remember we were kids, we'd go on holidays. My mom, she would have packed a teacup and tea bags. Like that was, it was very kind of, she would drink out of the teacups when we went away. But it was like that, so I think it's universally true. But so that track, when it came out, I was like, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant. And I've called it out like one of my favorite campaigns of 23 without a doubt. It was on our like summer playlist when we were driving to holidays in
wow.
Cork. Like my kids sing it. I just I'm fanboying here. I absolutely love it. And it's the bravery of it. It's like it could have gone pear-shaped, let's be honest. Like it really could have been
that's true.
awful.
And I suppose that part of, I do think that we are a relatively brave brand. I mean, I know there are bolder brands out there, but they're brands that are typically like it's part of their brand DNA to be provocative. Whereas I don't think Yorkshire Tea wants to be provocative. I think we want to entertain. But I would say that even though we're relatively bold, we've got there in increments. So we've done a series of pieces of online content and TV advertising where each time we've taken a step, we thought, is this a step too far? And actually, our audience has said, love it, which has given us the confidence to take one more step. And I think, we've been working with Lucky Generals now for nearly 8 years. And in that time, that's enough time to develop real, like almost telepathic levels of understanding and trust. So it just felt like it was the right time to try and do something as bold as that. And, the other thing I should probably say is, although like I've sort of kicked around the idea over time, one thing I particularly love is I barely had anything to do with that. Like it was my team and another team at Lucky Generals. All I did was kind of provide the air cover to give them the confidence to do it. And as backup in case, anyone got upset and it went wrong. So I still,
you were there.
Providing the air cover does give me some license to take credit for it, but I didn't make it.
And so what was the decision on the coffee side to kind of go and do a musical number there?
Yeah, I do think the success of Yorkshire Tea and the kind of things that we've learned on Yorkshire Tea have helped us with Taylor's Coffee, but not always. Like sometimes we followed the Yorkshire Tea example too closely and then realized it doesn't quite work in the coffee world, because coffee drinkers, even if they are actually the same person as the tea drinker, when they're being a coffee drinker in their head, they care about different things. They think about different things. So we've gradually realized, we've got to tread a slightly different path with Taylor's Coffee. I mean, for a start, roast and ground coffee is a much smaller market because when we think about coffee drinking in the UK, we're actually predominantly instant coffee drinkers still. Instant coffee is huge. Even, you've got things like Nespresso, you've got high street coffee culture, all those things, but instant coffee is still really big. So it's not as democratic and universal as tea bags when you're trying to advertise Taylor's Coffee. But what I think we realized was that we needed to find a platform for Taylor's that was as powerful as the one that Yorkshire Tea has with proper, and where everything's done proper. And we did quite a lot of research and gradually realized that we were really underutilizing the family nature of the business, but we didn't want to be too explicit and make it about the actual family that own the business, because they're not involved in the business anymore. And that might make it all a bit paternalistic and old fashioned anyway. But what we thought was there's something about the family quality of the business, the values and the fact that we treat each other like family. And we think we could extend that to include how we treat our suppliers and how we want to treat our customers. So that idea gradually came to the top as like, this is quite a powerful way to communicate why we are worth paying a bit more for. And then it became, well, how on earth do you communicate that idea in a sort of pithy way in 30 seconds it's going to land? And I guess because Lucky Generals know that I and my team have got a bit of a weak spot for musical comedy, maybe that's what led them to do what they did. But they came up with a lovely script that was all based around this song. And the more that we thought about it, the more that we fell in love with the idea. But we don't have the same level of confidence on Taylor's that we do for Yorkshire Tea, because Yorkshire Tea, like I said, we've built that confidence over more than a decade. So we still researched the creative before we made it. And I think I went into the creative thinking, we love this, but are we smoking our own dope here? Will punters like this? And actually, the feedback we got was some of the most positive feedback we've ever had. They were just like, I absolutely love this point. I think what you're trying to tell me is this, this, and this. And we were like, oh my God, that's exactly what we're trying to say. So I'm really excited actually, because I think we've made some cool stuff for Taylor's over the years, but this feels like the first time where we've made something where creatively we're all buzzing about it. But strategically, I also think we've hit on the right point. Now, the challenge obviously is to just ensure enough people see it.
Right. Yeah. Which gets into your media investment piece, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about, you've talked about media investment a couple of times. How do you think about your approach to media investment?
I think we are still trying to figure out how to get it right with coffee, whereas with Yorkshire Tea, it's one of those things where we haven't messed around with the formula, and we've tested and then reinforced based on the learnings of the test. Whereas with coffee, I think we've tried various different things, and no one thing has jumped out and gone, this is the right way.
Okay.
So, and we've also had some, everybody went through it, didn't they? But during the brief, surreal reign of Liz Truss as PM, we also had the mini budget, and the mini budget had a catastrophic impact on the British economy, and that impacted us too at a really crucial time when we were trying to budget for media investment for tailors. So we've just gone through a really rough patch where investment's been quite low, and building back the confidence to launch this new campaign took a lot of work. Because it just felt like there was so much uncertainty. So the research really helped in that case. And the latest, we've had the first wave of our brand tracking come back on our first burst, and it's really encouraging. So folk that have seen the ad and recognize the ad, like the messages they're taking from it are exactly the things we needed them to take. But the core challenge is not enough folk have seen the ad yet. And we're also recovering from a period of lower investment where it feels like everything's fallen back. So we're starting from further back than we'd like to, which, it's an obvious one, isn't it? But it's that, in a way, even though it's a negative, is a helpful lesson to embed in the business, that like, if you don't keep the momentum of investment, then you end up having to pay out more later.
100%. I've seen that so many times. My previous role, where we'd be in a market, there'd be investment for 6 to 9 months, and then there'd be nervousness or anxiousness, and you come back out, there's decay in your brand health, decay in everything else, and then it's like, well, we should go back in, and you're starting from such a lower base. And I know it's a really difficult one to work through, because if there's financial pressures, people are like, well, we'll just cut the budget, and marketing is an easy cut. How have you kind of addressed that with kind of your senior leadership team?
Addressed makes it sound like past tense and job done. It's not. It's an ongoing battle. So I worked quite a lot with a lovely guy called John Goldstone, who is a consultant working for the brand gym. And I once heard him talking about the fact that even though he's obviously, as a marketing guru, he is a champion of investment. But he made this point on a LinkedIn chat around, but the trouble is, as marketeers, we have to accept it's still discretionary, because if things absolutely get cut back to the bone, there are some things that you cannot cut, and there are some things that you can. So it's just part of the nature of being in marketing is we need to get off our high horse and stop being so sensitive about the fact that we have to prove relatively frequently the value of the investment. So I think, I've obviously, I can lean on the fact that we've got the Yorkshire Tea story to talk to my senior people. But the downside is the Yorkshire Tea story is so ludicrously successful that anything that's not quite as successful as that often looks like a fail. And I have to work quite hard to say, no, this is a win. I mean, compared to FMCG averages, we're actually doing better than normal. We're just not doing quite as well as Yorkshire Tea. That is, so I suppose that's the thing though about a role like mine, is that you often find that you're not really doing marketing anymore. You're doing the politics about marketing with other directors.
Yeah. Interesting point. John Goldstone, he's a wonderful human being, one of the nicest. You're my first guest, season 3. He was the very first guest on this podcast.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of working with John when I first became marketing director in 2016. And I basically needed like a coach and a mentor to help me, back to the earlier point. I absolutely come from a predominantly comms background, and I'm conscious that there was a lot about marketing that was I'd learned on the job, but I maybe didn't have properly ingrained in me. I didn't have the actual discipline. So I worked with John for a while. It was quite a weird experience because, lovely human that he is, what we realized was obviously he had been, PG Tips was one of the brands under his control before we worked with each other. But it was just interesting to think that we came together after a period of time where our brands had been rivals. But yeah, working with someone like John was just so helpful for me, because I just think he's one of those sort of rare people that is able to bring together the sort of joy and the creativity of marketing with the hard-nosed, it's got a commercial job to do. Yes. And you can't have one without the other. They're both two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And back to my, I guess, previous point of, it's not a hiding place, brand marketing. It has to be commercial. We're getting to the end, but you've talked about kind of as your role progressed and you kind of have evolved, and you're heading into a new role at Taylor's.
That's right. Yeah. So kind of as of now, really, I'm going to take on a slightly different remit, looking at overall strategy for the business, innovation and diversification. Because I guess, like I mentioned before, the success of Yorkshire Tea has been fab, but we have always been aware that it's within a declining market. And while we don't want to just sort of be complacent about that, and we will do things to challenge the decline of that market and try to re-energize standard black tea, I don't think that we can bank on that forever. And we're trying to grow Yorkshire Tea internationally, and that's going well. And there's lots and lots of potential for that. But the truth is, because we're owned by a family, and those, you've got at least 3 generations of shareholders in the mix at the moment. And those younger shareholders might well be thinking, like, what am I going to inherit in 10 years' time? Or when I have children, what will the business look like? So when you're talking those kind of intergenerational timelines, where what kind of business do we want to be in 20 years' time? I think that's where we need to start thinking seriously about, well, what else might we do with our brands? Or what other categories might we want to be part of? Or do we really want to have so much of our fortune wrapped up in the tea and coffee industry, when the kind of combination of climate change and social change means those two supply industries are really in a perilous state? That the idea that we could be much bigger and still be able to reliably source the quality tea and coffee that we need to produce our products that's not a given. If you fast forward 25 years, the supply of kind of top quality Arabica coffee is going to be highly competitive, because there just won't be that many parts of the world where you can grow it.
Right.
Which is quite a sobering thought, but yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Too hot, too dry, too wet, too not enough land, all sorts of things that could become problems. So I'm quite excited about that, because I really love thinking along those longer timelines and those bigger pictures. The bit that I'm sad about, but I think it's the right thing to do, is what it will mean is that I won't be as hands-on with marketing anymore. So I'll be involved in the kind of long-term creative strategy conversations, which I still love, but I won't be involved in the kind of execution of the ads. But like I said earlier, to be honest, I've been starting to step back from that stuff anyway, to allow my team to have the space to do it. And I feel like, especially with things like the Pack Your Bags song this summer, I feel like I've got all the evidence I need to show that they've absolutely got it, and it's in safe hands.
And it's brilliant kind of progression opportunity then for others. You know what I mean? Like it's wonderful that, I've talked to people about this before, where you see in some organizations, those opportunities aren't there, and people bring people in over people, and, we need to bring people in because they're going to be better. And, but actually, having people, the longevity in the business is a great thing, because you have the knowledge of the business, but then you've got all this kind of new work to do. It's fantastic opportunity.
That's good. Thanks for putting it that way, Connor, because the truth is, like I'm excited about it, but it's not easy. Like, letting go of things you love is a challenge. And also, even though the opportunities you've just described, I think that is the situation, but also the change is not easy for my team. There's a lot of uncertainty in the air at the moment that people are working through. And I think you do have to kind of keep the faith that the change is going to pan out well for folk. But, and even though I know that, and I'm telling myself that, and I'm telling them that, it's also helpful hearing folk like you remind me. So thank you.
Listen, Tom, thank you so much for kicking off season 3 of That's What I Call Marketing. Absolute pleasure. Anyone listening, you'll be unsurprised to hear I'm a huge fan of the brands, the work, and everything that you're doing. No wonder you get such high accolades in the marketing industry, because it's work that works. So, and best of luck with the new role.
Thanks so much, Connor. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a million. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. What a great way to kick off season 3. Dom has an incredible story to share about the success of Yorkshire Tea, but it is great to hear how it took time to build the confidence that the brand has now, and how they're taking the same sort of steps with Taylor's Coffee. It is such great work, and it really be interesting to see what Dom does in his new role, and how the marketing team will continue to deliver amazing work. Well, that's it for this episode. As always, thank you for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe to That's What I Call Marketing wherever you are watching or listening, so you never miss an episode again. And if you would like to get involved with the show through sponsorship or partnerships, get in touch. And if we can help you with your marketing, visit that'swhaticallmarketing.com and see how we can help.